Hi, Cara.
Hi, Vanessa.
So we're not big New Year's resolutions people.
No, right. We're not.
Because besides the data that New Year's resolutions, I don't know, are typically broken within days of the resolution. I should have looked it up, but
seconds.
I didn't.
It might be seconds.
But also because, and this is the same reason my husband gives for not doing anything for Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, which is that really you should do this stuff all the time and that it shouldn't be an artificial moment at which to change your habits or, celebrate me, for instance, as a spectacular wife and mother. Apparently.
But that's not what this podcast is about.
I don't have any feelings about that. He's like, but every day is Valentine's Day and Mother's Day. And I'm like, is it though? Is it? And yeah, so this episode is about, instead of thinking this as just New Year's resolutions, which will be inevitably broken, we're expanding the concept to think about how to set or reset or espouse some good, healthy habits, and what to do when you see a kid, moving in a direction that they claim is healthy, but maybe there are some concerns about whether that's the case. So it's sort of a two-parter. We'll start with the positive stuff, and then we'll get later on to a little bit of the worry. But I've been thinking a lot about what are the areas where things started out really strong last fall, particularly at the beginning of the school year. And then sort of as the semester wore on, things fell apart a little bit. And what do I kind of want to re-engage in? So my list, and then I want to hear your list, Cara. My list involved sleep, more of it. We can talk about that. Sort of what our family's diet consisted of and what were the habits there. Exercise, which interestingly enough was the one thing that didn't fall off over the course of the year. So that's, pat on the back for me. The person where every day is Mother's Day and every day is Valentine's Day.
I don't know how she does it.
I don't know how she does it. And tech use. So those were the four areas. And, some of those will be pretty familiar to our listeners. 3 of them are pillars of health that we talk about a lot. But those are what's on my list. Cara, what's on your list?
Well, I'm taking the framing of my list from my 21-year-old who said to me, New Year's resolutions are so out.
Yes.
And
there's a TikTok trend for that.
Yes. And I was like, 100%. They've been out for ever in my book. And she said, no, literally they're out because what all of her friends do is they do their in list and their out list. And there's a TikTok trend for that. And so I took that framing because I loved it. Because it's not about setting yourself up for failure. If you can't do the thing, then you haven't achieved your resolution. It's more okay, here's what's in and here's what's out. So, her list was very funny and it inspired me to be a little more light and airy with my list. But it wasn't all light and airy. So things that are in for me, I'm an avid meditator, and it's in for me to achieve meditation as many days in the week that I can, right? Which is the opposite of the framing it has been every year, which is to meditate. Because I feel better, and it's a big piece of my own personal health and wellness. What's in for me is to let go of any last remnants of envy. Yeah. I made a big push in 2024 to sort of just let go of looking at other people's lives and sort of going, oh, that's so amazing. And it's not that I don't feel that, but the jealous version of that. I did a lot of that before and I worked really hard on, but there's some there's still some stuff. So yeah.
Which is natural and human.
Totally.
To say,
but on my in list is to let that go.
Right. As my kids say, this person or this thing lives rent free in your mind. So you would like envy to no longer take up real estate.
Correct. It can pay me if it's going to be there is basically what you're saying. And yes.
Right.
So that's in for me. Sleep out for me are circles under my eyes. So that's
what is there a portrait in your non-existent attic of?
I mean, I gotta say, I am such a lover of sleep, and so much of it is how good I feel. But I'm not going to lie. There's a vanity piece too, which is on this face. You can see when I haven't slept, and you see my face every day on the screen, Vanessa, and you know exactly.
You always look beautiful and well rested. But what's really great is when I see my mom, and she looks at me and says, "You look so tired." And I'm like, "Oh, that made me feel a lot better." Thanks.
How about the one where it's like, "Oh, the last time I saw you, you looked so bad, but this time you look so good." What?
Oh, I don't get that. I just get that. I get the you look so bad now, as opposed to I'll tell you after the fact. Yeah. So circles under your eyes gone. Sleep in. Yes.
Yeah, sleep is in. And for me, it's funny, you hit a lot of the pillars of health as you were going through your list, which I love because they're pillars and they're foundational. And for me, it's been very parallel. Like I'm able to move my body regularly. That's very much thanks to my dogs who keep me moving all the time. And that is a huge thing. So the exercise thing, I think I'm able to check that box, but in the sort of hygiene, self-care part, I actually think there's a fair amount of work for me. What's in is learning a lot more about what's in the items that I put into and onto my body as part of self-care. I was extremely on top of it pre-COVID, for years pre-COVID, and then COVID took over that part of my brain. And I am very interested in spending 2025 learning a lot more about what products are really clean, and what really is the best. We're great about it for tweens and teens, right? But not so much for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I got rid of my plastic cutting boards. I actually am about to replace the dishwasher tabs that I use, because I've been reading about that. But yes, we're less good about what we put on and in our bodies than we are about our kids. One thing that you and I are changing together is that we are working into our shared schedule time to get up and move our bodies between meetings, partially because it's just proven to be better. I think it makes our mood better. Also because some very exciting news for listeners. I will be having a hip replacement, the first of 2 this July, and I physically cannot sit as long as we've been sitting. And so we, are coming up with ways to accommodate each other's needs. Like when I look at Cara and I'm like, oh my God, she needs to eat something because she's like sliding off her chair. We need to finish this meeting. So making these decisions, or Roger and I said, he looked at me and he said, can we just try to go to bed 20 minutes earlier than we have been? And that felt achievable, even though he's already asleep on the couch for 2 hours before we actually go upstairs.
Exactly. Okay, wait. I have something really, really funny to add about your stand-up motor break. We're third graders, kind of.
Totally.
So, my husband this morning was heading out the door, and he was a little bit late and he was sort of frazzled, and he had a meeting before he started seeing his patients for the day. And I said, oh, is it an in-person or is it Zoom? And he said, oh, this one's Zoom. And I was like, great. Because he was complaining he hadn't had time to stretch this morning. And I was like, great, you can stretch during your Zoom meeting. And he was like, who stretches during their Zoom meeting? I was like, oh, Vanessa and I do every single day. So it was a moment. It was very funny.
Yeah, I do. I have been talking about getting a standing desk, and I am resolved to do that. It's not a New Year's resolution. It's just a, general health and well-being resolution. And one of the things that I resolved last year, Cara, after we came back from our book tour and my children had eaten takeout for like 3 months straight, was to start cooking more for my family. And I have stuck to it. It really, it's annoying and I don't always love it. But it became really important to me to nourish my kids. I was thinking about how much I was nourishing them or trying to nourish them emotionally, and with love, but that I felt badly that I wasn't doing a better job of nourishing their physical bodies. And so we've been doing that together, which has been, it's good. And it allows me, it's not a 4-course meal every night. There's a lot of sheet pan dinners happening, but I feel like we're taking better care of ourselves together, which has been great. The tech use is a very interesting one. You are much better at tech use than, meaning you spend less time on tech.
Keep going with that sentence because this is amazing.
You spend less time on tech. You also don't like it and don't want to be on social media, which makes it easier.
I mean, listen, I don't not like it. I recognize that I could get sucked into it very, very easily.
Right.
And I don't like the feeling of being owned by my tech. But yeah, I have built the muscle over years of walking away from my phone. I literally put my phone down and I walk away from it. The most commonly uttered sentence in my house, Vanessa, is, "Where is my phone?" I don't know.
I don't know. And I don't care, to be honest.
I don't know and I don't care. And that strategy has protected me from screen time. It is not a great strategy in terms of a lot of other things, but I definitely turn off and disconnect in ways that most people don't.
So we did one thing together, and then I've done a couple things in my house. One thing we did together is we made a pact to cut back on communication over email and text over the weekends.
That's in.
We're in, Cara. We're in. Not that we aren't communicating, but there were weekends where we were really spending a lot of time on email and text and working, and we're really trying not to do that. So that's what we've done together.
And I just want to jump in and add, if Eve Rodsky was sitting here on this podcast, she would say that's because you also are doing a lot of the unseen work at home. And I just want to acknowledge that. We do a lot of the unseen work. We're married to people who do a lot of the unseen work too, but like that.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I will. You can't keep working on your job and also work on all the other things that need to get done around the house if you don't back off. Like something's got to give. And so honestly, that shift, it has been massive. And for anyone who has the flexibility to limit if their work is just bleeding into every corner of your life, I think we're here to say we've been doing this for about 4 months, and it has changed for me personally.
Yeah.
It has made everything about that unseen work, the bill paying, the grocery shopping, all that kind of stuff, that fits into a much neater place now, which makes a humongous difference.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of research now about having a rest day. Actually, is proven to help people be happier and more productive. Napping is in, at least
napping is in
my house.
Yeah.
And I know, Rye's a napper. But a couple of other tech changes that I am making. One is that when I used to take a spin class in person, no phones were allowed in the spin class. And when I started doing Peloton at home, I kept my phone, in one of the water holders. And I often spend a lot of time dealing with that unseen work while I'm theoretically exercising. And so I made the resolution to put my phone away while I'm working out. I have not consistently successfully done that, but I am determined to do so because in the times that I did do it, it was a much better experience for me physically and emotionally. So that's one big change. The other one is with my youngest kid, I have reinstituted mandatory reading over the weekends. So in addition to the homework he has to do, he has to read and he has to put his phone on a completely different room than, which is what he does when he does his homework, when he reads, because he was such an avid reader when he was younger. And then he got a phone and it was this COVID and his reading just fell to the wayside. And I was feeling really sad and like I couldn't kind of get it back. And I said, yes, I can. Like, this is not a fait accompli. And my daughter reads anyways because it's an escape for her. That's how one of her coping. And so it was so funny. We were at dinner before all my kids went back to school. And I looked at, I had already announced to him that was going to be happening. And we were talking about, what do we want to do differently in the new year? And he looked at me and he's like, I'd really start reading again on the weekends. Everyone burst out laughing and they're like, it doesn't count. She already told you that was going to happen. But it was like, I don't even want to say he was resigned to it. He was like fully embracing of it, which made me think about how kids, and frankly, we as adults, are often seeking limits and structure. And it was like, it was almost as if, and if he heard this, he would be like, Mom, that's so not true. So I'm going to say it because he won't listen to this episode, which is like, he was almost relieved that I was reinstituting the reading requirement. And for people listening and wondering what the first book was he read Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights, which had been recommended to me as an audiobook to listen on long car rides, but he read it and really, really enjoyed it. So in case people are looking for a recommendation.
I love that recommendation to take back reading. It's in.
I mean, it's like
so in.
Yeah, car reading is in, unless it's you 10 years ago where you took away reading as a punishment to one of your kids.
So another thing that's out for me this year is rehashing things that I did that are mockable. That's very out.
Oh, that's never out in my house. I spent a car ride this weekend hearing about all of the terrible choices I made with activities with my kids that were total failures, at the end of which I was told with a twinkle and a giggle that as a mother, I got about a 6 out of 10. That was where that whole conversation ended up.
Tough grading.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
I wonder what I get. I'm not going to ask your kids.
Well, and it was clearly, it was said in jest, and I laughed along, even though there was like a mild dagger to the heart. But it was a very funny thing about, and listen, he had to dig deep. I mean, those things were not accessible, but they are the things that get hashed and rehashed over and over again. Like the night we went to watch turtles hatch, except when we arrived on the beach to watch turtles hatch, we were told we might have to wait for several hours.
Delayed gratification is in. Yeah.
Yeah. Not in my family. My family looked at me and said, we want to leave now. And we turned around and walked back up the beach and got the hell out of there. So yes, rehashing is always in my house, but is out in the Natterson house.
Yes. Let the Nattersons know, because I don't think they've gotten that memo. I mean, I think it's a really fun framing for this conversation around healthy habits, because think about what happens in the first quarter of a year. So you got New Year's. So you got all these people making these New Year's resolutions, and they're really doing it in an attempt to take better care of themselves. So it's a great, sort of premise for it all. Then you've got health and sex ed tends to happen in the late winter, early spring time in school. Usually somewhere around late February, March, April is when these courses really get up and running in most middle and high schools. So the confluence of those things means that there's a lot more focus in the first half of the year on kind of healthy habits. I want to flip the lens around to the other side, Vanessa, because sometimes the focus on healthy habits can itself become a little bit unhealthy. And I do think that it's worth some time getting into some of the flags of these, whether it's a resolution, a lesson implemented, an in-out list, things being taken to an extreme. And I think we should start with the concept of orthorexia, which we've covered on this podcast, but you want to get into it a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. I mean, so it's not a clinical term, as we've discussed in previous episodes, but it is a trend that we're seeing. And frankly, it's a trend that's very much fueled by social media. And it applies to people of all ages and all genders, but it's an obsession with, quote, healthy eating and exercise, but it becomes to the extent, so it's not necessarily calorie restriction. It's not necessarily exercising to the point of danger, but it's a fixation on what is being eaten, how much exercise, what kind of exercise, right? It's an utter adherence to a rigid set of rules in terms of intake of food and exercise. And the concern about it can come in a couple of places, and Cara, please add on to this, but part of it is cutting out certain food groups. And their food groups, I'm not talking about like ding dongs and Doritos, but like carbohydrates, for example. It may be avoiding eating in restaurants because of concerns about ingredients used when cooking in restaurants, for example.
Right. I mean, so I want to go back to the comment that it's not a clinical term, because what you mean by that, you're technically correct. It is not a term that is accepted in the diagnostic manual. It is not something that a doctor can put down as a diagnostic code and it gets reimbursed by insurance. It is very much a clinical term insofar as there's a clear emerging definition of it that a lot of people in the health and wellness space agree upon. It's exactly what you said. It's an obsession with being healthy. I've told this story many times on the podcast, although I thought I told this story many times in my house and my kids acted like they'd never heard it over the holiday break when they were home. But my math teacher in 6th grade who ate a pound of carrots a day.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I know this story.
Right. I mean, that is, there are lots of ways that orthorexia can present, but that is like, it's an obsession with being healthy. And sometimes that means an overindulgence. And as you said, sometimes it means cutting things out. I'm going to get so healthy, I'm going to cut out all carbs. And the very logical question is, where does orthorexia end and an eating disorder begin? This is where that lack of quote unquote clinical agreement means it's up for grabs. It's not super clear. You definitely want to talk to someone who has some expertise or a lot of, at least a wealth of knowledge about eating disorders and disordered eating to help you there. But we also see orthorexia with bulking up. I mean, a lot.
Right.
Like there are these kids who, especially boys, who often want to build their musculature and they're eating, drinking protein shakes and they're taking creatine and they're doing all these things. And again, it's on the quest to be, quote, healthy. And that, again, it's a very tough balance. We had on the podcast, maybe it was about a year and a half ago now, one of my favorite guests of all time, Henry, who came on and talked about his type 1 diabetes and his diagnosis of type 1 diabetes and what it was like to live with a chronic illness. And one of the things that he mentioned on that podcast was before he was diagnosed, when he was starting to develop symptoms, he didn't know what they were looking like. He was slimming down a little bit. He was losing weight as part of his diabetes. Everyone around him was like, oh, look at that. He looks great. He's getting healthy, right? So it's all contextual, and it's all like there's no one thing or three things that we can tell you to look for when you need to shift from, wow, great job getting healthy, to this feels worrisome to me. But like every other topic we talk about, you've got to use your internal meter as an adult in a kid's life. If something feels off to you, just because it looks healthy to the outside world, like follow that gut instinct, right? And go talk to someone and get some advice and get some help.
And if it's causing your kid to cut themselves off from family meals or outings or socializing with friends, if it's starting to impact their lives, even if you don't see a physical shift, but there's a behavioral shift, that's another thing to keep in mind. If you notice, Cara and I did not talk about, that our goal was to lose 10 pounds. When we think about how we talk about our goals with our families, we want to make sure those goals are not weight-based. Frankly, I would hope they're not appearance-based, but really health-based. And so that goes back to kids making choices and changes that they claim are healthy, but it's not entirely clear they are healthy. And so another recommendation I would make, if you're noticing a kid starting to make changes, this is a time to get elbow to elbow with them and like, hey, what's on your TikTok feed? My TikTok feed is like literally dachshunds right now. And I'm like dying to see, and I send them to you, but what's on your feed, right? And maybe TikTok will get banned. I don't know, Instagram Reels will be cool for the under 40 set. But it's a good time to get curious about what videos they're watching, what they're watching on YouTube, sort of seeing what's feeding the choices they're making in their online lives.
Here's another one that's sort of adjacent to that, which is some kids will resolve to focus more on their work. They're really trying to lock in or get better at one class or one sort of corner of school. And that's great. And oftentimes there are a lot of strategies that they can employ. I'm hearing lots of stories from teenagers about how incredibly locked in they feel thanks to nicotine, thanks to Zyn in particular, or other products like Zyn, which are these little nicotine patches. Kids put them, and we've talked about them on this podcast, but they put them under their lip, along their gum. It's not just kids. Lots and lots and lots of adults use them. These are very high dose nicotine patches that get absorbed very quickly. And nicotine can help some brains lock in and focus. And in fact, those are the words that I hear from them. I'm so locked in. And this is a middle school, high school, college phenomenon as much as it's anything else. So again, like if you have a kid who is working to have better study skills or is trying to focus more, and suddenly they are behaving in ways that look really great, but you're trying to work it out. How did they get here? One way that does not work is to ask them if they are using a substance to help them focus in an accusatory way, right? We know that those types of conversations shut down immediately. But it is completely fair and appropriate to go to a kid and to say, I am noticing a massive difference in how you're doing your work or in your behavior or in this or in that. And I'm just curious what strategy you're using, because it is really remarkable. And if you're not satisfied with that answer, the follow-up is, I was also learning a little bit about how nicotine can change the way kids focus or behave or feel. And I'm always going to be open with you about what I learn. And I hope you'll be open with me if that is something that is that something you have tried? Or if that is something you have tried, I hope you will come to me because it is not a benign thing. Here are some of the other things that can happen if you start using nicotine. You want to keep the conversation short, non-accusatory. You don't want to lecture them, right? But if your spidey senses there's something they're doing or taking in order to shift their behavior, even if they're shifting their behavior in a productive way, you want to open up that line of communication. By the way, taking someone else's medication like Adderall, Ritalin, any of the ADD medications, that's another thing that often starts happening in high school and college.
Yeah. I mean, Cara, that's a perfect segue, which is if you have a kid who is taking medication or who has a prescribed medication and is not taking said medication, this is a great opportunity to check in about why aren't they taking it? It could be anything from birth control pills to ADHD medication to an SSRI. But these are prescribed by physicians. These are decisions you've made together as a family. And if they're choosing not to take them, it's really important that we're in conversation with our kids about why not and how can you help? And do they need a different medication, or have they had a change in lifestyle that affects whether that medication is working for them, or a change in situation? So if you have a college kid who was in high school last year and was taking a slow release ADHD medication, and then they get to college and they don't need medication till noon, they don't want to take that slow release. They want a shorter acting ADHD medication, or maybe they're on an SSRI and they don't like how it makes them feel and they've stopped taking it without letting you know. So being in conversation, again, as you said, Cara, not in an accusatory way, not in an interrogatory way, but in a way like, hey, I noticed that this pill bottle was actually super full and I was expecting to have to refill it. I'm curious, like, what's the latest on that?
Yeah. And in the world of mental health and medication, what we know is that oftentimes when people are on antidepressants, for instance, and they feel better, in an effort to be off things, often because they want to feel healthier, they will say, I'm better, and they stop the medicine. This can work for some people, but for other people, it can send them right back to their starting place. And so these are conversations that begin in the tween and teen years, depending upon what a person's individual circumstances are, but they extend all the way through adulthood. And it becomes really, really important to recognize as we talk about healthy habits in general, that when you're on a medication, and this is a great way to frame it with a kid, when you're on a medication, be in conversation with the person who prescribed that medication for you to figure out when it's safe and healthy to come off that medication, right? Because when kids leave our house, whether it's, for a period of time over the summer, or whether it's college or going to get a job or whatever it is, we're not looking at their medicine bottles. Frankly, there are a lot of people who are trying to establish privacy boundaries with their kids. And even when their kids are living under their roof, they hit a certain age. And in order to try to keep privacy honored, they will say, great, I won't go into your bathroom. I won't look. And that's what works in their family. But then you're caught flat-footed and you don't have a way of making sure that they are doing the thing or taking the medication that they have been prescribed. So it's a really great set of conversations around healthy habits there with medicine.
And so often kids will say, well, I didn't talk to you about it because I knew what you were going to say.
Oh my gosh. Most common answer. Yeah.
And that's a hard one because yes, we can be predictable and yes, we can be broken records. But what that statement says to me, and it has been uttered to me many a time, is I'm not proving myself to be a good enough listener to my kid. I'm presenting my opinion too quickly. I'm fixing or solving instead of hearing them out. I'm, making assumptions that might not be fair. And so if you're in a situation where you really need to find out what's going on with your kid and they say to you, well, I figured I know what you're going to say. There's no point in me having this conversation with you. I would urge you to say, again, which I have said many a time, I realize that I'm not doing the best job I can of hearing your side of things on this, whatever particular issue it is. I'd like another chance because I really want to hear what's going on. And I feel like I've kind of fallen down on the job a little bit. So give me another shot.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you don't want to give me a shot, you have to talk to someone about it. So let's talk about who you're going to talk to. So this comes full circle, right? We started with levity and our in and out list and healthy habits and what we're looking for ourselves. We're landing in this place of recognizing that our kids, the kids in our lives, they are very independent creatures. They have their own in and out list. They have their own resolutions. They have their own wishes and desires. And sometimes as the adults, we can see very clearly that the thing they want is a horrible idea, right? It's dangerous, or it's, there are long-term complications. You take that, fill in the blank supplement that has God knows what in it. There could be consequences, whatever. And
Samson just has you on speed dial, Cara. Instead,
he really does.
He checks with Cara on the latest question was, is it okay if I eat 6 eggs for breakfast? And I was like, dude, you are not bothering Cara with that question because I can answer that question. But yeah, not everybody has you on speed dial. And sometimes we as parents have to say, I don't know. And sometimes we have to say, let's check with your pediatrician. And sometimes we have to say, let's look it up. But the horse has never left the barn in any of these circumstances. There's always an opportunity, even if they're not living under our roof, or even if we feel like tech has gotten out of control, or even if we feel like we have concerns about substance use or diet or exercise or any of those things. There are ways back from all of it. And we have to trust ourselves to help and support our kids and set limits and find resources and get help if that is needed.
And as you said, Vanessa, to understand what's at the root of why they want the thing they think they want. Because sometimes, and we'll go to the most common example of weight. Sometimes what they want is a body shape that they are seeing all around them. And it's humiliating to put words to it. It's shaming to put words to it. It's a no duh to put words to it. Like, this is what they're seeing all around them. Of course, they want that and they aspire to that. And so instead of us approaching healthy habits and resolutions around healthy habits as we know best, I'm here to vote for listen to what they want, listen to how they aim to achieve it, and then just educate them around the long-term implications or even the short-term implications of their choice, and see if you can't help them have a different set of goals if their initial goal puts them not in a healthy space, but in a riskier space. And by the way, Vanessa, I'm going to count on you when I have my in and out list to tell me when I've messed it up and picked something and said, this is in for me. And you got to tell me, like, tanning salons, what? So
you're the last person who would ever go to a tanning salon.
This is true, but it's all to say that it's not just kids who set goals sometimes that are not ideal. So I think the goal is to set healthy goals, right? I mean, isn't that when they launch and they fully adult?
I think we can end here, which is our kids are in relationship to their bodies and their emotions and their brains forever, right? It's like
That's right.
the one thing we never shed or leave behind. We may morph and change, but so it's more about building a relationship, a loving relationship with our bodies and our brains and our feelings, and making choices that show all those parts of ourselves love, and teaching kids, modeling for kids what that looks like. And love is imperfect, and love is inconstant, and love, is deeper and more intense at sometimes than others. And that's true of how we take care of ourselves. And it's the knowledge of the sort of ups and downs of that, and the ability that it's never a fait accompli, that you can come back from it, and set new goals and make new choices. So, Cara, you are in for 2025.
Yes.
I will just tell you that. You are in.
Yes.
Awkward is out. You are in.
Well, Vanessa, you're in right alongside me.
Oh, thank God. Thank God I made it.
Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Cara. Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.